Hello, and welcome to, God, I think this is our fourth Sunday sermon. I am Reverend Riv, here to lead the service, as it were, and I hope everybody's having a good Sunday morning. Thank you for being here. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you've never been here before, welcome. We have some fun here on Sunday mornings. We just talk about some interesting stuff from the Bible from a very objective point of view. We have some laughs, we tell some jokes, we learn some things. It's all in good fun. So before we get into today's sermon, I feel like I need to clarify something because I don't want this to be taken the wrong way in any way, shape, or form. So I'm just going to be super fucking blunt about this. Anti Semitism is disgusting. It is rampant in this country, and it has absolutely no fucking place in any form of civilized society. Let me be unequivocally clear about that. I shouldn't have to say it, but I'm fucking saying it. And the reason I'm saying it is today we're talking about Jewish space lasers. And I know it became a big meme on the internet, and it was big fun because that ridiculous asshole from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene, decided to say that, she reshared some lunatic fringe, theory that the California wildfires were started by a Jewish space laser. I would hope that everyone here today does not have their head wedged so firmly up their ass as to know that the California wildfires were not started by a Jewish space laser. There is no secret cabal of Jews controlling the world and manipulating things. That's anti-Semitism, and we will not tolerate it here, nor should anyone tolerate it anywhere. That said, the Jewish space laser thing was funny because of how absurd it was. So, I decided, when you look through the Bible, there's a few Bible stories where Jewish space lasers seems like an honest way to explain what the fuck the text is talking about. So, I thought we would have some fun and look at two of those stories today in a little more detail. One is probably, I'm going to say, if you didn't grow up in the church, I would say you definitely don't know the one story. And the other story, I would imagine that most people, if you grew up in the church, have heard the story. We're going to look into it a little bit deeper today. It's a pretty common story. So, again, thank you for being here. Don't be a dickhead. And, let's have some fun. Let's look at some good stuff. Space lasers, Kurt. Thank you for being here. Yeah, we got space lasers. But, of course, the first thing that we always do is the rule of the law. So we got to start with our rule of the law today because that's how we start things. So I was going through, and again, one of the things I like to do with this rule of the law segment is find a law, especially one that you may have heard of, because I feel like you don't have to be an overly religious person to have heard about some of the more obscure or bizarre sounding rules from the Old Testament. And so I've been trying to find ones that people probably know at least something about. And I think I've stumbled onto a good one today. This one's a little fun because there's really nothing controversial about this one. It's not telling you to cut a woman's hand off or strangle your kids. Yes, that's a real rule. Or anything like that. It's just, it seems, again, it's kind of like one of those, it's oddly specific. And why is it so specific? We're going to try to... That's a low bar for decent. Yes, that's what it is. We're not mutilating anyone with this law. So I guess it at least wins for that, right? So, all right, let's get into our text here, shall we? Leviticus. This is a book that has a whole lot of obscure and insane as fuck laws in it. So let's take a look. This is, of course, we start with the King James Version, and then I usually go with something that is, a little more digestible. So, ye shall keep my statutes. Thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with a diverse kind. Thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seed. Neither shall a garment mingled of linen and woolen come upon thee. Okay, so there was a lot packed into there. We are not to let our, cattle gender with a diverse kind, can't mingle our seeds in the field, and our garments cannot have linen and wool. So that's again, what do those things have to do with each other? Not a lot on the surface. So let's read that in English, so to speak. It's actually, mentioned again in the Bible. Remember how last week we found our obscure rule in multiple places? Same thing going on here. This is from our old buddy, the book of the law, Deuteronomy. Thou shalt not sow thy vineyard with diverse seeds. Lest divers there is a archaic way of saying diverse. Just keep it easy. Lest the fruit of thy seed which thou hast sown, and the fruit of thy vineyard, be defiled. Thou shalt not plow with an axe and an ox, with an ox and an ass together. Thou shalt not wear a garment of diverse sorts, as woolen and linen together. So now, as we talked about last week, this is repeated in two different places. So clearly, it's important enough that they felt the need to mention it twice, despite the fact that it doesn't seem on the surface like it's all that big of a fucking deal, right? Let's keep going here. This is the New International Version of that first verse we read. Keep my decrees. Do not mate different kinds of animals. It's pretty simple there. Do not plant your field with two kinds of seeds. Do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. Again, like what the hell? Why should we care? And then we get another one, Do not plant two kinds of seed in your vineyard. If you do, not only will the crops you plant, the fruit of the vineyard will also be defiled. Now we're getting somewhere. Yeah, we look at the Bible from a historical point of view instead of a religious point of view, and we just kind of look at some different things in the Bible and talk about it. So it is a bit historical. So, welcome. You're welcome to hang out. We love having folks here. We're not really making fun of the Bible. We're just kind of looking at some of the absurd stories in it from a more rational point of view. So, welcome. And, yeah. Yeah, we're just, right now we're talking about we start every segment off with a little thing from the Bible about, weird rules in the Bible and see if we can't make them a little more interesting. So, if you dig it, give us a follow. We appreciate you being here. Lager. I like the name. So yeah, so why what is with all this, what are we talking about here? Why do we care so much about these different rules? It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. You're having a really bad connection? Oh, I'm sorry. Is everybody else having that problem? And oh, thanks. You got me. So why do we have these, obscure rules? Well, I think the big thing was if you look back at the rules, you have to understand where the Israelites were at this point. They had just come into Canaan. Do I follow any religion? I do not. I was raised in the church. My father is still a minister. I actually went to seminary and studied, but never really got on board with the whole program. So I've got lots of inside information, if you will, but I do not subscribe to any belief system. And so, yeah, you have to look about what God's rules really did. From circumcision all the way down for the Israelites, is they kept them different. They helped separate them from the Canaanites, who, as we talked about in an earlier episode, were the true natives of Canaan, and that they were being displaced by the Israelites. And God wanted it to be very clear who his people were and who the others were. Well, so he gave them all of those, what seemed to us, archaically silly little rule. No, I am not a Satanist. That profile picture is the logo of my little company that I run. We work with a lot of heavy metal bands and stuff. No, I am not a Satanist. I don't even believe in the devil. So so these rules were about helping set the Israelites aside, keeping them, in their own place. Well, one of the things that was done. Oh, thank you for the follow. Much appreciated. So, one of the things that he was doing was, they're trying to keep themselves segregated. I'm losing my train of thought here. So, one of the things that the Hittites did, who we've studied in previous messages, the Hittites are not, big fans of the Hebrew people. The Hittites were very in to, oh, welcome, Bale. Yeah, the Hittites, they were not big fans of the Israelites. And one of the things they did is they had a very special ceremony where they had one specific field that was set aside for. Here I was thinking that Riv lived deliciously. And one of the things the Hittites did was they blended seeds, and their high priest would go out and do this ceremony where they would throw those mixed seeds into a field. And they believed that by mixing all the seeds they were going to plant in this one field, they were going to ensure the success of all the other crops. So one of the things God's doing here is the Hittites, this is just a simple way that God is differentiating from those people who, no, they did not live in Israel, but the Hittite religions did. The Canaanites often worshipped very similar gods to the Hittites. And so they, again, and there were Canaanite ceremonies as well. The grain mixing is not something he wanted them to do. And it's not really great for your fields. If you're trying to grow a field, you really need to sow the same field. If you get competing grains sown, you will not get as high of a yield. So there's actually a common sense practicality to what he's going with there. And also, every time the Hittites and other areas would skirmish with the Israelis, inevitably there would be intermarriage, because it wasn't all just fighting. I know sometimes you look at the Old Testament, all you see is these people fighting with each other all the time. They intermarried. They lived alongside each other. It wasn't pragmatic to fight all the time. And so one of the things that kept happening, and you notice it repeatedly in the Old Testament, is that they would kind of commingle religions, and then eventually the Israelites would just start worshiping whatever, or if the Israelites moved into a new area and that area had a religion that was different, they would sometimes start intermarrying and then just get into that religion. And then God would get mad and they would get subjugated, and that's the whole book of Judges repeatedly. So that's really all there was to it with the seeds, is it was just a planting thing. It differentiated them in a religious way, and it was better for the seeds anyway. There are some rabbinical texts that claim that this was actually, that there's some more archaic rules about this that we're not going to get into today, but it basically helped the Israelites do crop rotations at a time when they wouldn't have known to call it crop rotation, but any farmer will tell you crop rotation is a great way to not wear out the soil and to get consistently high yields on your crops. So that's kind of what was going on there. Why you can't breed an ox and a donkey? Well, that wouldn't work anyway. But there are there are some animals you can crossbreed. You can make a mule from a donkey and a horse. And while they didn't have horses there, you can crossbreed some animals, but almost always when you crossbreed animals, the offspring is sterile. As we talked about last week, the Israelites were in the position of trying to grow their numbers, not just their numbers in their people, but also their numbers in possessions and things they control. Sterile offspring would be completely useless because, they needed more. So it's simple about you wouldn't have wanted sterile offsprings. Am I interested in Israeli history? Somewhat. I used to work at a Jewish school, have a lot of Israeli friends, and so I've read some interesting books on it, so somewhat interested in it. And the other reason that when he mentions you can't plow with an ox and a donkey, that's more of an animal cruelty thing. The ox is infinitely stronger than the donkey. If you yoke an ox and a donkey together, the ox is going to cause the donkey to get overworked because the ox is going to be able to plow at a much more steady rate than the donkey is. So it's just don't be shitty to the donkey. Don't make the donkey do work that it can't do. Put two donkeys on there or put two oxen on there. Don't mix a donkey and an ox because it's bad for the donkey. And then we get to the third one, which is kind of the weirdest one of the set. It was don't wear clothes that have mixed grains. Or mixed fabrics. Who cares, right? Who on earth would care if you mix your linen and your wool? How could that possibly be a bad thing? Well, to that, we need to stick with our religious practices. And this dazzling guy here, that is the getup of the high priest. They wore this ridiculously blinged out outfit whenever they were going to perform their duties. The ephod is the garment underneath his awesome chest piece. It is the shoulderless kind of tunic that they wore over top of their undergarments, but underneath the chest piece with the medallions on it there. It was made from both linen and wool. How do we know that? Because in the book of Exodus, where God gives them the ultra specific reasoning as to what the high priest should wear, he tells them that the ephod has to be made of the finest linen that they have, and it has to be sewn with all these different colors, and he's very specific about which colors are used. Well, I don't know how much you know about textiles, but dyeing fabrics back in the day was incredibly costly. You had to use, natural made dyes, generally from animals. The purple that so many people associate with biblical things because it was the color of kings, it was made from mollusks. And you had to crush up a lot of those mollusks to make a very little amount of purple dye. Purple dye on a weight ratio cost more than gold back then. And linen did not take well to dye. Yes, that is how a Jewish high priest, artist license, of course, but yeah, that is a fairly good representation of what the Jewish high priest would have looked like in the biblical times. And the thread that they would have used that was colored, wool, was much easier to dye than linen. So they would have made him a very fine linen garment, incredibly soft, and then they would have adorned it with all the colored fabrics. So really, what this rule was doing was just trying to make sure that the high priest that there was a set of reverence, that this garment that the garments that he wore were so special, nobody else could even wear something remotely like it. There are multiple priests in Judaism, but there is the high priest. There's only ever one high priest. Priests in Judaism, it's a good question. In Judaism, there was a specific tribe. If you wanted to be a priest, you had to be from the tribe of Levi. The Levi tribe were the only people that were allowed to become priests. Then, within the tribe of the Levites, there were some specific rules. I'm not going to get them. Maybe we'll do that one day. We'll talk about how did you become a priest. But there were some very specific rules. And then one of them would be raised up to the position of high priest. He was the only one that could ever go into what was called the Holy of Holies. The way the temple existed before they had a physical temple is it was a giant tent, and think of it like one of those nesting dolls where there's layers and layers and layers, and there's the outside layer that the basic people could come in to offer their offerings to the priests, who would then take them into another layer and actually offer the offering up to God on behalf of the people who had brought it. Then there was that third layer where the Ark of the Covenant, I think everybody knows what that is, or at least has seen Indiana Jones. That was kept in the Holy of Holies. It was a small area inside of what they called the veil, which was an incredibly thick, I believe it's almost a foot thick wool drape that ran around it to kind of, because the glory of God was so powerful that if anybody but the high priest went in there, they dropped dead or were struck with the Jewish space laser, maybe. That's what we're going to get to next. So yeah, these rules were just made, again, these are all about differentiation. I drastically don't think that God cares if you wear mixed fabrics. This was just to make the priest seem a little bit more special and to give people a reverence for the garb of the priest. The other priests, what do they do? Temples and Jews. The other priests, as I was saying, they handled the day-to-day things at the temple. They would do sacrifices for people, and no, the temple in Judaism moved many times. There was the first temple of Solomon, and there was the second temple after the Solomonic temple was destroyed. I'm talking before they even had a physical building for the temple. The temple was basically a tent that they had when they moved around in the desert with the Ark of the Covenant before they had really taken Jerusalem and settled in Canaan and truly turned Canaan into what we think of as Israel today. In the early times when they were still basically a nomadic people, as they're, getting into the land of Canaan and moving about, once they built the Ark of the Covenant, they had a whole kind of setup for where it came with them, and the Levites would have been in charge of making sure that got moved around all day. I do not know if Israel still has a high priest or not. I don't believe so. I think they go with rabbi now. No, is there a high rabbi? I don't know. I do not study Judaism at that level. It would be something interesting to look into, but no, I could not say if I don't believe they still do. None of my Jewish friends have ever mentioned a priest. They always just refer to as their rabbi, and that could just be a vernacular thing. It may have nothing to do with the actual, terminology and the function, rather. Okay, so that was our rule of law. Now we're on to the main course here. We're going to talk about the space laser. And again, we're not being anti-Semitic. Marjorie Taylor Greene's a terrible person. I just thought it was funny. And it made me think of two Bible stories that there's really no other way to describe what happens than a laser comes out of the sky and annihilates stuff. So it's like, cool, let's check it out. So, of course, our artwork there is of the original Bible superhero, Elijah. If you don't know Elijah, it is worth a read. His story in the Old Testament, he's about as well fleshed out a character as there is. He does some straight superhero stuff, like miracles galore. It's funny because his miracles often kind of parallel the miracles that Jesus performed in the New Testament. So there's definitely like a parallel line there. And Elijah also he whines, he complains, he has doubts, he feels put upon. So to me, he's a very well-rounded character. He's not perfect. He is a very flawed character, which I think makes him more interesting. And also, he's a diva. Complete diva. We're going to get to that. But first, let's start with the first space laser story that I remembered from the Bible. It's our boys Nadab and Abihu. Not bright boys, as we're about to find out. So, here we go. And Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer, and put fire therein, and put incense thereon, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. And there went out fire from the Lord, and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. That's kind of intense. Let's read that in English. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, took their censers, put fire in them, and added incense. And they offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, contrary to his command. So fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them. So, okay. like, so, it seems intense, right? What did we just read happen? Well, Nadab and Abihu had just become priests. They were sons of Aaron. He was a Levite. Aaron was kind of the first real priest in the Hebrew faith. These two sons of his were to take over their duties as the priest. And while the backstory we're kind of supposed to read into this here is that they didn't take it seriously enough. And if there's anything that the Old Testament stresses, it is that taking your religious duties seriously is a big deal. God does not tolerate taking his stuff not serious. Also, so strange fire that was referenced there, that's kind of the key here. And so I think to understand this story and whatnot, you kind of have to understand what the time frame, what was going on at the time. At the time, the Hebrews were still kind of nomadic people. They're wandering around. God appeared to them as like a pillar of light. And he kind of appeared at the front, and they would follow this pillar around in the desert. And they had a very specific procedure for worship, where they got these bowls and the altar, and they got it all set up, and they would put incense on the altar and an offering on the altar, and then the priests would ask God to consume it. And a laser from the sky. I mean, there's no other way. How else would you? I don't know what you would describe it as. They say fire from the heavens would come down and strike the altar and consume everything and light the fire, and this is how it was done. So what did we notice in our story there? Nadab and Abihu lit their own fire. They didn't wait for God. The Hebrews were one tribe of the Aramaeans, nomadic Semitic people of the Levant and Syria, next to the older settled Semites, the Assyrians, and the Babylonians. I'm using Hebrew to refer to the people of the Old Testament. That's okay. And the fire would come, and so these guys, they brought their own fire. They didn't follow the procedure. They didn't wait for God. They just decided that, oh, okay, I wasn't sure if you were saying that I was because I know I got into this with somebody a couple weeks ago that there's so many terms for the ancient Israelite people. You can call them Israelites, you can call them Hebrews, you can call, there's so many different terms. And I know somebody used Hebrews as referring to people that still exist today, and it's like, I mean, I guess technically you could, but it's not really correct. So thank you. But yeah, so these guys lit their own fire. Now, we don't get any backstory as to why they lit their own fire. I guess that's for the reader to enter. Were they impatient? Did they just really not give a shit? Nobody knows. I talked to a rabbi friend of mine, and he said that there is some idea that sometimes, this didn't happen right away. That the priests would go out there and they would set up the altar and everything, and God might not, it wasn't just like an instant, like, okay, there's the offering, boom, here comes the fire from heaven, game over. And that maybe they were being impatient, and hey, come on, man, I got stuff to do. I wish God would hurry up and light this fire so we could get out of here. You know what? Fuck it. Let's just light the fire ourselves and we'll move on. And God didn't appreciate that. And so instead, we get this fantastic artist rendering of the situation that I found. There's God, the pillar of light from above, and I don't know about you, but that looks like a space laser striking down some people there to me. But you see, they've got their little ark there, or their altar, and what happened? Boom, space laser happened. Why? Because they were hubristic and impatient. They just couldn't wait for God to do things in his time, which I think is really, again, part of the moral of this story. I've also looked in, and some rabbis will tell you that one of the other morals of this story that you should take from it is that there are no little sins. That if God tells you to do something, regardless of if he tells you to do a big thing or if he tells you to do a little thing, you're supposed to do the thing. Otherwise, he will strike you with a laser. Do I believe in ancient aliens? That is an interesting question. I I would have to say that I don't know. I feel like believe might be a little bit of a stretch, but would I be open to the idea that there is the possibility that at some point in our history there was another intelligent life forms that could possibly be responsible for some of the stories from the past that are very hard to reconcile with our knowledge today? Sure. I'll be open to that. It's kind of a Fermi paradox thing. Maybe, the aliens just happened to pass by way back then. So I'd be open to it. Let's put it that way. But yeah, so these guys lit their own fire for the incense instead of just, following the rules. What happens? Space laser. That's what happens. So just do it the way you're supposed to do it, I think is the moral of the story. Shortcuts get you lasered. That's where we're at with this story. It seems a bit of an extreme response, but then again, I think it was also part of the point of this story. No, I'm using the term that was used by some people referred to, lightning from the heavens from God as a Jewish space laser. So I'm just using the term that they used. That's all. It's more of a comical thing. All right, the next space laser story to me is one of the most interesting Bible stories because it contains trash talk, all kinds of just pure insanity, lots of people die, all the good stuff. So we've got our big battle royale here. A gamma ray burst from a black hole? I don't know enough about what that would do, but I would say that there could be any number of scientific things that, yeah. We talked about Sodom and Gomorrah last week, and a lot of people have been like, oh, could you have used that for the Jewish space laser? And I pointed out that their Sodom and Gomorrah sat on what was a fault line, and that there's also some archaeological record for there could have been a meteor shower or an intense meteor strike that destroyed the towns. And what are you going to call it if you never even had heard of what a meteor, you don't even know what space is? What would you say? It's the wrath of God. He struck those cities down because they were there and now they're not. So so what we've got here is one of my favorite showdowns in Bible history. We've got on, I don't know which side of your screen it's on mine, it's on the left. We've got the prophets of Baal, who was one of the preeminent Canaanite gods at the time. He was a fertility god, also a wind god. He was big cheese, kind of like the Zeus of their world, if you will. On the right, we've got Elijah, our pre-mentioned prophet. That is, of course, if you've ever used the phrase chariots of fire or heard of chariots of fire or anything like that, you're referencing Elijah because Elijah was one of the people that never died. He bounced on a chariot of fire up into the heavens. So let's get the tail of the tape, our two combatants here in this battle. We've got the prophets of Baal. There were 450 guys. They sacrificed bulls, and in desperate times, Liza's going down. They sacrificed bulls. In desperate times, they would do child sacrifice. That is one of the repeated things that in the Bible that God highlights is how detestable he finds human sacrifice. That is literally the word that is used almost every time he references people who do things like that. That is a very clear distinction between the Hebrew God and the other gods. Is the Hebrew God absolutely did not deal with child sacrifice, except for that whole Abraham and Isaac story, which we're not going to get into today. They also practiced ritual sex and mutilation. So these are fun guys. These guys, there was a lot of them. They had seduced the people of Israel at this point in our narrative of them. And these guys had them worshiping Baal, this kind of half man, half bull guy. And yeah, God was none too happy about it. In the other corner, we've got Elijah. He performed a ton of miracles. He is one of the few people in the Bible that, yeah, the old school paganism could get really intense. Really intense. Elijah is one of the only people in the Bible to be credited with raising someone from the dead. That's a pretty good party trick in any party. He was heavily persecuted by the monarchy of the time. The king of Israel in the northern 10 tribes was King Ahab. And have you ever met a good guy named Ahab? No, you're generally always a bad guy in the story if you're named Ahab. He was the king, and as most kings are wont to do, he wants to, consolidate his power. How does he do that? He marries the daughter of a non-Israelite who, can help him, another king. Her name is Jezebel. If you've ever heard someone called someone a Jezebel, yeah, this is the chick. She's the OG on that. She is why that phrase comes. She was a worshiper of Baal. So she really, really, really hates Elijah. Like, I can't overstress. Oh, we met the Philistines in our very first episode. And, yeah, but we could go back to them at some point. But, yeah, Jezebel spent a great portion of her life trying to kill this guy. And he spent a great portion of his life running from her as to not get killed by her. The picture there is when he was on the run from her and he was starving to death and he cried out to God and God sent flying ravens to bring him bread. It's a pretty interesting story because he still complains. God has ravens bringing the guy bread and he complains that all he gets to eat is bread. So then God sends the ravens to also bring him meat and he complains that, well, he still doesn't have enough to drink. Like I said, the guy is a diva of the highest order. But he's also one of only 2 people to never die. That's pretty cool. The other person who is listed as having never died in the Bible is a man named Enoch. It said that he walked with God every day, and one day he just didn't come back. So, in the Bible, we are led to believe that there are 2 people that never died. There are some people that think in the book of Revelation, they talk about 2 men coming back from heaven to tell everybody how bad we all are, and this starts the end of times. And there's some biblical scholars that say that will be Elijah and Enoch that will come back then, because they still have to die before they can truly go to heaven, because God would be fallible. He said it's appointed unto man once to die, so if these 2 guys don't die, they're messing up the system. We're not going to get into all that today, but it's a fun little A-side. So, I called Elijah a diva. And you might think, that's a bit of a charge to level at him. Sure, he was complaining while God was providing for him, but can you really call the guy a diva? He was running from his life. I would like to illustrate with this next story what a diva he was. This is from 2 Kings. And he went up thence to Bethel. And it was going up by the way, there came forth little children out of the city, and they mocked him, and said unto him, Go up, thou bald head, go up, thou bald head. And he turned back, and looked on them, and cursed them in the name of the Lord. And there came forth 2 she-bears out of the wood, and tare 42 children of them. Yes, the prophet Elijah got called bald by some little kids, and so he had ravenous bears come out of the woods and kill 42 children. That seems a bit extreme. Is it nice to make fun of people for their physical appearance? Absolutely not. Should you kill 42 children because they called you bald? I'm going to go with no. That seems like an overreaction. But that, I think, helps you understand the person that we're dealing with here. This guy's intense. And I mean intense. So, I don't know how much you guys know about the battle that is about to take place, so I'll just take a minute and set the scene. So we've now got the prophets of Baal. Christians and Jews often say about this story that it's not meant to be taken literally, that it is just supposed to be a story that emphasizes almost like a fable. Most of them, unless they're a complete literalist, if they're a complete biblical literalist, they will tell you that this story illustrates that you should never make fun of anyone, period, but certainly not someone who's a man of God, and that they are off limits, and that God killed these children to teach, a lesson to everyone that Elijah was his prophet. People who aren't literalists say that this is more of just a fairy tale that is there for, and that they don't think that God actually had bears eat 42 children, mainly because that sounds really horrific and that's practically impossible to defend. But anyway, so Elijah has had it. The people of Israel are they're doing a two-step. They're worshiping God when Elijah's around, but when Elijah's not around, they're worshiping the prophets they're worshiping Baal under the prophets, and Elijah's had it. So he gets the people together, and he says, all right, I'm done with this. It's time for a showdown. He said, if God is God, you need to worship him. And if Baal is God, you should worship him. Yes, that story's in the Bible. 2 Kings 2, verses 23 and 24. It's not one that gets brought up in Sunday school a lot. So he says, we're going to have a battle because I'm tired of you people vacillating between which God you worship. So he says, let's have a challenge. We'll build 2 altars. We'll get 2 bulls. A bull was the common sacrifice of the Baal worshiping cult. He said, you guys will prepare your offering however you want, and then you pray to Baal to send fire down and light the altar. And I'll pray to God for him to send fire down and light the altar. And whichever God does it wins. And that's the one that'll be God. And the people are like, yeah, this is a great idea. We're in. Let's do it. So Elijah tells the prophets of Baal, you guys go first. So they build their altar, they sacrifice the bull, and they start praying for Baal to light the altar on fire. Nothing happens. Elijah, in true troll form, starts taunting them, telling them maybe they need to yell louder. Maybe he's away on vacation and he can't hear you. Maybe he's relieving himself. I swear to God, he says that in the text. It's fantastic. He goes, God's just, maybe your God's not here. You got to call louder. He'll come back. He'll hear you. And these guys get to the point where they start mutilating themselves, cutting themselves, offering blood sacrifice if Baal will simply send down the fire and light their altar. Nothing happens. So then Elijah goes, all right, I got this. He goes and gets 12 big stones, one for each of the tribes of Israel, and he kills the bull and puts it on. But the guy's a diva. He is a showman. He goes, no, that's not good enough. He goes, go get buckets of water. And then he digs a trench around his altar. He says, go get some buckets of water. He says, dump the water on the altar. So they saturate the altar. He goes, do it again. So they do it again. He tells them to do it a 3rd time. 3 is a very important number in the Bible. 3 is often used for certainty. If you needed to prove something, it had to be you and you had to have 2 witnesses. 3 people would establish things. When Peter denies Christ in the Old Testament, he does it 3 times. There's another Elijah story where he doesn't want to go do something God wants him to do, and God has to 3 times create some kind of natural phenomenon to convince him that he's super serious about doing what he wants him to do. So he's dug this trench. His altar is so saturated that the water has now flown into the trench and has, filled up a trench. The trench is 2 seahs. Seah is our weird. We like to hear sometimes talk about obscure biblical measurements of unit measurements, and a seah is approximately 7 liters, maybe a little bit more, close to 2 gallons. So basically, he's got a 4 gallon trench around his altar. His altar is soaking wet. And he goes up to the altar now. He drops to his knees and he says, God, I know you're the real God, but these people don't. They don't deserve it. But God, show them what's up. Boom. Space laser annihilates the altar. It burns the stones, we're told in the story. It lips all the water, gets sucked up out of the trench. It is annihilated. The people are completely convinced, and they celebrate their new adoration of God by going and killing all 450 of the prophets of Baal down at the river. They take the 450 guys and brutally massacre them to show their devotion to God, because what's an Old Testament story without a body count, right? So, I mean, again, it's Elijah going over the top, the water, the taunting, everything. He's a really interesting character, and I think we are probably going to have to do some more Elijah stories, because he really is like a superhero in the Old Testament. And he's got some wild stories. I mean, today we talked about him having bears kill children and bringing a laser strike down on an altar. Oh, who wins in a fight, Elijah or Shamgar? Oh, that's a tough one, but I mean, Shamgar's ox goad is good, but can you beat a space laser? I don't know. Can you beat the space laser? Because what happened here, right? He struck down from on high with a laser. And so, again, it's kind of funny because everybody was like, oh, the Jewish space laser news story, that's so ridiculous. It is. It's ridiculous in the context that she put it out. But yet, if you want to apply modern thinking to classic stories, what else would you call these multiple stories of a burst of fire from the heaven that tactically annihilates a very specific target? That sounds like a space laser to me. So we're going to go that maybe there's a little more to that story than meets the eye. If there is a Jewish space laser, what I can definitively say that it did not do was start the California wildfires. That was an idiot who was having a gender reveal party. That's not a space laser. That's a moron. Those are different things. If anybody can, it's Shamgar. I mean, he is kind of our de facto. He's our dude around here. We're big Shamgar stands all around. But yeah, I don't know. The space laser is gonna be tough. But yeah, and yeah, not long after this, Elijah starts a school for prophets, where Elisha, which as a young man learning the Bible, I can't tell you how many times I confused an Elijah story with an Elisha story. It was quite confusing, so good look on that. But yeah, and then when Elijah tells Elisha, hey, you're in charge now, you're the main prophet, he goes, what are you talking about? And a flaming chariot comes from the sky and scoops up Elijah, and he heads off. Some people have said this is another Ancient Aliens kind of thing, that, maybe the guys that were firing, maybe it was a spaceship that was firing the space laser, and now they've come home to take him home on the mothership. There's a lot of ways to interpret that. Yes, Elijah was the original who we talked about today. His top student who became the top prophet of Israel is Elisha. And it's not long after this story that Elijah begins kind of a school for prophets to, now that the people are following God again, they need more than just him. So he starts training people. and his top pupil is Elisha, who has some very cool stories. He has some very cool prophecies in the Bible that he wrote that a lot of people have tried to say could be, explanations of ancient aliens. Elisha describes a wheel, and a wheel turning within a wheel that burned with fire and flew through the heavens. And a lot of people have said, if you really break down his description, it seems like it's a UFO. I don't know, but I will say I've seen some artistic renderings of his description, and it doesn't take a whole lot of imagination to take that description and say, hey, you know what? That's a UFO. That's a flying saucer. So maybe we'll do a whole episode about that. Maybe we'll talk about ancient aliens in the Bible. That could be a fun one. Next week, we are going to do one that I think is going to be a lot of fun because we're going to kind of take the supernatural out of a story. We're going to do the story of Jericho next week, but we're going to look at it from a practical military standpoint and what likely actually happened. No, we can't prove what happened, but I've always had an issue with we walked around, it just seems too simple to go with, can I do a stream about the Greek Philistines? Absolutely. I am always open to suggestions. I will look into that maybe after next week. Because next week we're going to do Jericho. But I don't have anything for the week after that. So yeah, Greek Philistines. I would be interested in doing that. We talked about the possible Greek nature of the Philistines in our very first episode. That, could be the Isle of Crete, maybe where they originally came from. So yeah, we could definitely talk about that. I think the Philistines are super interesting. I was talking about them in our first week, how it's kind of rough for them that they're not in a lot of historical literature outside of the Bible. And the Bible is, of course, written by their mortal enemies. So it's kind of rough that the only real historical record of you that exists to this day is, written by your worst enemy. Ah, very cool. Yeah, I had read that. They it's always hard to try to determine exactly where they were from, but that they very likely were Greeks, and they had some very interesting. But yeah, they appear in the Bible. They're always the bad guys, and so yeah, maybe we'll do a maybe we'll do a revisionist history for them and try to present them in a more positive light, since the Bible 100% just depicts them as the bad guys, which. Come on, you can't. If you wanted to learn about America, you wouldn't go to Iran and ask them to teach you about America. You would not get a very clear. I mean, hell, America doesn't teach you an honest history of America, but Iran would not be or like Israel. If you wanted to learn about Israel, you wouldn't go to Saudi Arabia and ask them to teach you about it. You might get some bias there. And I think that's what the Philistines suffer from in the Bible is, some enmity bias. But yeah, we're gonna talk about Jericho because there's actually a super cool, like, the actual story of Jericho. What is more likely to have happened than magical trumpets knocking the walls down was that there was one of the most amazing where eagles dare kind of military missions of subterfuge and ninja like assassination techniques, and we're talking about magic knocking walls down. We're missing the cool part of that story. And also, we're relegating a heroine from it. And the Bible does enough to ignore women that I am going to highlight this woman next week because she's the real hero. Joshua gets all the credit. She's the real hero, and she's getting no love. They're probably from Crete, and the Isles of the Aegean, the Egyptians called them Pesla, translation of Pelesians. That all kind of checks out. Yeah. So yeah, maybe we'll give the Philistines some love in about 2 weeks. We'll talk about them and try to get their side of the story. Since we've got the other side of the story is rather, most people know the Philistines. They maybe think David and Goliath, maybe Samson and Delilah, and they don't really get a lot further than that. So yeah, let's give some thought to that. But hey, thanks everybody for being here. Logger, thanks for joining. It was great to have some new blood in here this week. Always interested to hear what other people want to hear about, so we will definitely add the Philistines to our queue. Hope you guys have a great Sunday. Whatever you do today, I hope it's good. I hope whatever you do, it does not involve getting struck by a space laser. Don't make fun of bald people because I don't want anybody to get eaten by bears. That's what, if you take away nothing else from this, don't make fun of bald people because bears might eat you. That is sage advice that I think I can give. And also that maybe Elijah should have chilled out just a bit because he had no chill whatsoever. But thanks for being here, everybody. I hope you had a good time. I love doing these. I'm glad you guys were all here with me. Makes it worthwhile. And yeah, we'll be back next Sunday, 10 a.m. We're going to talk about Jericho. And we're going to get to the bottom of it. We're going to give Rahab her due. She got screwed out of that story. All right. Everybody, have a good one. Take care. Thanks for being here. Enjoy your Sunday.